The Weekly Hugh Demon. Full steam ahead.
So, I ran across something from my collective unconscious recently. My collective unconscious, that's something of an oxymoron. For the uninitiated, collective unconscious is a term used by psychologist Carl Jung, J-U-N-G. It basically means all that stuff embedded in our soul that we can't see. It's stuff that's come down to us over the generations from our ancestors, and it gives rise to archetypes, like tree of life and various symbols. It goes on and on. Anyway, these archetypes are things that influence us that we can't see. And actually, I shouldn't even talk about Carl Jung. I'm pretty ignorant about him. I've been interested in him in years, but in the 1990s, a guy named Richard Knoll just freaking savaged him in a book called The Jung Cult. I remember reading it and I enjoyed it, and I pulled it off the shelf getting ready for this podcast, and I realized I'd pretty much forgotten everything about the book. Fortunately, I write a lot of notes in my book so I can go back and look at them and at least find what I thought was interesting back in the 1990s. I also was looking at my bookshelf and I was like, oh, Noel also wrote The Aryan Christ, The Secret Life of Carl Jung. I haven't read that book yet. But I think when you see Secret Life of and Aryan in the title, you can assume it's not a hagiography. I also read about Carl Jung and E. Michael Jones' modern classic, Degenerate Moderns. And Jones, like Knoll, savages Carl Jung. Jones primarily seems to focus on the fact that Jung would bang his patients. And I don't mean try his, temperament, try his patients by having sex with his patients, his female patients. He also took Jung to task for trying to reach spiritual heights and spiritual insight, but without the Christian ascetical practices like fasting and almsgiving that go with it. So anyway, for years I assumed Jung was a bad seed, and I just kind of avoided him. And then, I read that what I think is a spiritual classic of the 21st century, The Virgin Eye, by Robin Daniels. And I discovered that Robin Daniels was a Jungian analyst. So he bought into the whole Carl Jung, system. I guess he did. I guess I shouldn't say he bought into the whole thing, but clearly if he identified himself as a Jungian analyst, he thought there was something there. And again, this guy has amazing spiritual insight. And then I'm no expert in Jordan Peterson, but I also think Jordan Peterson likes Carl Jung, so heck if I know. But anyway, man, it's easy to get off on tangents. My only hope is you find them as interesting as I do. All the stuff about Carl Jung, that was just an introductory line about my joke about my collective unconscious, that oxymoron type statement. Now, to my heroic credit, I resist the urge not to tangent off into LSD when I referred to Jung's effort to obtain spiritual insight without the spiritual ascetical practices. But parenthetically, suffice it to say, the use of LSD in this regard is Gnostic-like. The effort to obtain spiritual truths through material means. Just like Simon Magus in the Book of Acts trying to buy the Holy Spirit for money. So, stop it! Get back on task! So, anyway, a thing from my collective unconscious, which I use to refer to a lifetime of reading and, more importantly, forgetting. I'm reading David Mikic's, M-I-K-I-C-S, intellectual biography of Jacques Derrida. Great book. Didn't address some of the things I hoped it would address, but definitely enjoyed it. If you're interested in Jacques Derrida, it's probably a good jumping in point. It's only 250 pages, so it's reasonably digestible. And parts of it are just absolutely packed with good stuff, by the way. But the last third of it just wasn't great. Anyway, at one point, he's talking about how the first large urban civilizations, like Babylon, Egypt, quote, used writing as an elite mechanism for social control. The secrets of the realm remained in the hands of the few who had knowledge of script, unquote. That is something I remember reading years ago about how, when writing was relatively new, by today's standards, that it was like a form of magic, and it put you like in an elite category. You're higher up, and you had like the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, if you could write, if you could understand it. So the question I have is, did universal literacy eliminate this? We can all read now. I mean, I realize there are still some people who are illiterate or functionally illiterate in the United States and in Western and developed countries. But effectively, we have universal literacy now. So this whole language and control thing, does it even apply anymore? Well, I think there are a couple examples where you could say it does. Consider proper grammar. You know, all those rules you have, which, by the way, really didn't exist until the 19th century. There's a philologist named John McWhorter, or linguist, John McWhorter. He's pretty solid on this stuff, and he talks about how until the 19th century, and you know, these books about proper grammar coming out, grammar was very fluid, and it was constantly changing. Now, I am something of a grammar phobe. I think it's a good thing to have these grammar rules, if for no other reason than to retard the rate of change. I mean, language is going to change no matter what. You can't stop it. But the rules of grammar slow it down so English doesn't evolve quite so quickly. I mean, have you tried to read Beowulf? I have. I'm not sure I did. It's like really, really hard to read. But I think that was Middle English, and you go back to Old English, it's like more German than it is English. Language is going to change, and if you have rules of grammar, that'll slow down the rate of change. So subsequent generations and subsequent centuries are better able to read previous writers. Anyway, I am something of a grammar phobe. I believe in it. I've gotten into it. I can even tell you what a gerund is without looking it up. I'm the kind of bastard that corrects my kids and wants to correct others when they say something like, "He is taking Fred and I to the store." It's me! He's taking Fred and me to the store. You're the object, not the subject in that sentence. Is that a way of setting yourself apart? You know, Shesky, you want to be elitist? You want to look down on the uneducated, and therefore you've mastered, or in my case, semi-mastered the rules of grammar? Could be. Kind of set yourself apart that way. But there's no control associated with it. You know, so being a grammar phobe, that's just being an elitist nerd. It gives you no power. It gives you no control over other people. It's just debased snobbery. So let's consider a different way language kind of sets people apart. How about wokeness? The whole woke language. You know, Michael Malice in his new book, well, it's been out about a year now, but he points out that the social justice warriors are constantly changing the lingo. And everyone goes along with it. On day one, this is a term for this, and then 300 days later, that term's out, and it's a new term. Why do the social justice warriors keep changing the lingo? And Malice says, it's simple. They keep changing it to signal to others that they're part of the elite. They're on the correct side of society. So by changing the lingo and you then repeating the lingo, as one commentator said, you know, social justice warriors are like, they swim in a swarm of fish, and when one turns left, they all turn left. One turns right, they all turn right, and they all stay in formation. And language is crucial to show that you're part of one of those fish. You're part of that group. You're part of that in crowd, that woke crowd. You have to use the correct lingo. You know the lingo, and you're on the cutting edge, and you signal to others then that you're part of that group. Okay, so, just like with the grammar snob that I am, the woke crowd are snobs in their own way. But does it matter? Is it like the grammar snob just some pathetic little feature that Eric Shesky has? Or does the wokeness have a measure of social control in it, like the ancient Babylonians and Egyptians who could write? And here I think it does. I think this is what sets the woke people apart from grammar nerds like me. Let's face it, the left controls education and media. That can't be doubted. You know they control the colleges and universities. You know they control the major media. You know, when I say institution, I mean big. I know you have the Hillsdale colleges out there. I know you have talk radio. I know you have websites. I know you have this podcast. So it's not that the left controls everything. But when it comes to the big institutions in education and media, the left controls it. We know that. Big is left. And you have to keep that in mind going forward. Big is left. And think about it. Why else would ESPN get political like it was during the 2000 teens? I mean, I've come on this podcast before. It was absolutely freaking insufferable. And they're being political at a time that the country was ridiculously divided politically. Still is. But, in the past 5 years, they've been really, really divided. So you knew if you said, I like Trump, I don't like Trump, or took positions that were tantamount to the same thing, or I want gay marriage, I don't want gay marriage. If you're doing that, you knew you're polarizing half your listening audience. And you're a freaking sports network. I mean, it'd be common sense that you would just avoid that topic. It's like, you're in 16th century Europe, and you're trying to appeal to someone about what are frick sports they played back then. And you're going to talk about things about the Saints. Well, the Saints are going to favor this sporting team. Or what, and then the Protestants are upset that you're talking in Catholic lingo. It's like, why would you even go there? You got to polarize. You're in southern Germany in 1580. Why the frick would you, as a sports broadcaster, obviously take a pro-Protestant or pro-Catholic position on frickin' anything when your job is to comment on the dice game they're playing? But that's what ESPN did. You have a situation where political fervor is almost like at religious type peaks, but they took political positions. They did it so much that last May, the president of ESPN basically apologized and said, hey, we've done our surveys and it's pretty freaking clear our viewers don't like us being political, so we're going to stop. And they pretty much have. And that's great that they've stopped. But why'd they even start? Well, it's simple. ESPN is part of Disney. It's a syllogism you should never forget. Disney is big. Big is left. Therefore, Disney is left. And Disney has $100 billion in assets, 200,000 employees. They don't get much bigger than that. You pretty much have to go to state and federal governments to find employers of that size. Or bigger. So again, yeah, Disney is big. Big is left. Therefore, Disney is left. ESPN is part of Disney. That's why they did it. By using woke language at ESPN, by taking woke positions, they're signaling that they're part of the left. And that's what other people do. So no matter who you are, if you're an actor, or maybe even a baseball player, by using woke language, you signal that you're part of the left, which is the same thing as saying you're part of the elite. In this regard, you're talking about education, media, but we also know the federal government is left. I mean, central government is a leftist principle going back to Marx, even before that. Growing the central government, having central control over the economy, that's a left-type proposition. So if you want to advance in government, or you want to advance in big education, and those are the major freaking players, and increasingly if you want to advance in big business just in general, you want to signal that you're part of the elite, that you're one of the woke. So it's important to take on woke language. It's a sign that you belong with the people who are in control. So it's cowardice to take on woke language. It's a spineless thing to do, but it's important for your career, your prospects, your income, your family. So I kind of get it in a lot of ways. If you're in ancient Babylon, you want your family to have a nice house in the Euphrates, well, you better learn how to write. In America 2020, you better learn to keep current with the newest SJW jargon. From what I can tell, a guy named Lawrence Cahoon is one of the foremost experts in postmodernism. He wrote this big fat anthology that I'm trying to work my way through right now. And I've seen him quoted by various other people who talk about postmodernism. Anyway, in this anthology, at one point he writes about postmodernism's aim to invert the binary, to deprivilege the privileged, black over white, female over male, any non-Christian over Christian, etc. And Cahoon says it's a, quote, characteristic strategy, unquote, of many forms of postmodernism. He says that the postmodernist asserts that, quote, hierarchical dualism, unquote, is a bad thing and a phony construct. And that, and I'm just going to read here exactly what he says, quote, the privileged groups must actively produce and maintain their position by representing or picturing themselves in thought, in literature, in law, in art, as not having the properties ascribed to the underprivileged groups, and must represent those groups as lacking the properties of the privileged groups. So he's saying that that's what postmodernism is attacking. The idea that these privileged groups are always trying to set themselves apart from the non-privileged groups. Is it me or the postmodernists painting a picture of themselves here, as evidenced by the whole woke language? I just find it fascinating that the SJWs, which most of them are Antifa, which are deconstructionist Antifa types, that there is no truth, all is power type stuff, going back to Nietzsche. And as Cahoon says, they are attacking the privileged groups who've always tried to set themselves apart and put themselves over the non-privileged groups. With woke language and the fact that the left has bought into it like it has, and the left has taken control of the big institutions, you have postmodernists controlling society in a postmodernist way, attacking the very thing that postmodernism was built on. Postmodernism wanted to kill such social controls that put the privileged in position, but now the postmodernists, in the forms of the social justice warriors, are using the exact same tactic. It's really, really fascinating. And you could say, well, okay, Shesky, all they're doing is kind of, they have inverted the binary. The non-privileged have become privileged, perhaps. Maybe they have kind of done that by using their woke language and their freaking bizarre positions, like Bruce Jenner as a chick, those type of things. Maybe they have kind of inverted the binary, but they're not oppressing anyone. They're just kind of signaling to each other that they're part of that woke elite. I'm like, really? They're not oppressing anyone. Not at all. Not the Catholic Church. Not evangelical Christians who believe that gay marriage is an abomination. They're not oppressing anyone. Okay. You never heard Hillary refer to people who don't share the woke vision as deplorables. You never heard that. And it's pretty clear that the postmodernists, back in the 60s, 50s, 70s, they're probably onto something. Okay. I think they were onto something on this whole idea that certain groups are privileged over non-privileged groups, but their political descendants have basically done the exact same things that the people like Michel Foucault condemned. And I want to go back real quick to that David Meekick's book about Derrida, because his whole point about language of control, or the Babylon or Egyptian writing, the people could write controlling society, his whole point was to tie into Claude Levi-Strauss's point about such control. Levi-Strauss condemned it. Levi-Strauss was a structuralist, and I'm going to get into him at some point. Pretty interesting guy. His whole point was their phony social constructs created this hierarchical social order, which is bad enough, but then the privileged use that social order to oppress and use violence against the lower social orders. That's what Levi-Strauss was kind of railing against by pointing out these phony binaries. And that's my concern here. I mean, go look now where we are with Antifa. The Antifa types who are like the Claude Levi-Strauss's political descendants, the Jacques Derrida political descendants, they justify violence. It's just beating up white guys who are part of the social power structure, which not realizing that they're on the inverted binary, that they're part of the power structure themselves now. But they justify violence against people like you and me on grounds that they're part of the elite. They're part of the people that need to be in control. Again, they wouldn't say they are. They're going to think that they're battling from underside. But it's like, no, your whole language, your whole world outlook is embraced by people like at ESPN. I mean, at all the Ivy Leagues and the higher institutions of learning, your position is king. So you're not battling from the underside, but yet you are using violence against people you think comprise the lower social orders. I'd point out that taxation is a type of violence. So when the social justice warriors talk about reparations to blacks, or what are de facto reparations to blacks, like the welfare system created by Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1960s, which freaking destroyed the black middle class and the black family. if you doubt that, by the way, go listen to an economist named Walter Williams. If you listen to him for 3 seconds, you're gonna hear him rail against what the federal government did to the blacks in the 1960s through the Great Society. Anyway, that taxation against the largely white middle class to give to whoever is on the underside, of the binary, blacks, third world countries who apparently were oppressed through colonialism, whatever. That is a type of violence, by physically. You have to remember, taxation is violence. There's no doubt about it, taxation is violence. It's interesting that in this day and age, the government has pretty much completely eliminated the use of violence by anyone but themselves. And think about it, back in the 19th century, people used violence all the time. Kids got in fistfights, adults got in fistfights, there were still duels. I'm not saying that was better or worse, but the modern condition we have right now, where the government has a monopoly on violence, that was unheard of until the past 100 years. And I don't think it's a good thing, by the way, but I'm not here on this podcast going to talk about it. But the government has a monopoly on violence. Therefore, it's no coincidence that it also has a monopoly on taxation, which is a type of violence. And think about it. If you don't pay your taxes, what happens? Well, they take it. They take it against your will. And if you resist them, you'll go to prison. It's that simple. They will, at a force of a gun, they will take your money. That is no different than what a mugger does. A mugger takes your money at the point of a gun. That's the exact same thing the government does. And I get it that maybe there needs to be some measure of taxation because we are social animals and we thrive in community, and if there's a community, there's going to be some sort of government, or there's some sort of government needs to be supported by tax. Yeah, I get it. But don't lose sight of the fact that there is a government, and when they take your money, it is fundamentally an act of violence. You can consent to it. That's fine. You can consent to the rape too, then it's no longer rape. But if you don't want to pay the taxes, then what? I'd rather see government be more like a Kiwanis Club. Where you gotta pay your dues, and it's voluntary. If you want to pay your dues, then don't participate in Kiwanis. You can't be a member. Again, can't really get into the whole, that's not exactly my position, can't really get into it, but don't lose sight of the fact that taxation is violence. It is a type of oppression, and the upper classes justify that against us, middle class bourgeois. They justify it, just like the folks in, Egypt and Babylon said, hey, we're in control of the writing. We're going to tell the lower class what they need to do, and they better do it, or we're going to justify violence against them. And the same thing now. It's like, well, we're part of the ruling class. We're part of the elite. We know what's best, and we're going to justify, we're going to use that position to justify violence against the middle classes. All right, let's do some lightning segments. If you're 30 years or younger, I want you to consider a world you've never known. A world without constant war. Or more precisely, a world without the United States in constant war. I mean, think about it. It's been 19 years now. Our war in the Middle East, the war against terror, it's intergenerational at this point. In 19 years, that doesn't even count the clandestine meddlesomeness that kind of irritated our Muslim brothers, so to speak, in the first place. And I don't know how to... Yeah, my biggest concern is, if you're in your 20s, maybe early 30s, you're just thinking, this is the way it is. It's like, no, it's not. When I was a kid, after Vietnam anyway, from 1974 to 1990, those 16 years of my, from age 8 to I graduated from law school. There was no war. We weren't battling. War didn't dominate the headlines. You're growing up in a remarkable time, and unfortunately, a very sad state of affairs that we've become this type of country that's involved in constant wars. And this is partly triggered, to be honest, by this whole Iran-Iraq thing. I not followed as close as I ought to, but I was listening to Peter Van Buren. He was on the Scott Horton show, and he is pointing out, just talking in general. Peter Van Buren, he's with the American Conservative, a top-notch magazine. I definitely recommend it. I don't subscribe myself. I used to, and I do pick it up, and I go to the website a lot, but it's definitely a good magazine, worthwhile supporting. Yeah, but as Peter Van Buren, he points out that the parallels to the Roman Empire and 19th century British Empire are just really startling. And the Roman Empire, you go back and read its history, and they're constantly in some sort of war someplace. And so was the British Empire in 19th century and early 20th century. They just constantly were at war, couldn't stop fighting. I'd softly suggest if your country is in combat for more than, I don't know, say 10 years straight, something is wrong with your country. And it's not everyone else. That'd be like the kid who gets in a fight every day after school, coming home and just telling his mom, but they're all assholes. It's like, no, maybe you're the asshole. If you're in constant war, if you're constantly getting in fights every day, every year, something's probably wrong in your house. You gotta take a look inside. Now, of course, you could be like the weak kid everyone picks on, so someone new is beating the kid up every day after school, but that's clearly not the United States in the 21st century. And we are ass kickers extraordinaire. We are very good at what we do. So I'm reading A Peace to End All Peace. It's supposedly the definitive source about the founder of the modern Middle East. It's really good. It's interesting, filled with all sorts of neat anecdotes and various facts like this one. In 1912, Great Britain ruled a quarter of the land surface of the planet. And that's just astounding. And that doesn't include any land area in the United States, Russia, all of Europe, besides Great Britain, obviously, or Mexico. And so it's everything else. They own 1/4 of it. That's really astounding when you think about it. And obviously, leaves no doubt why they're in constant war. There's a big footprint that they had to police. And I should bring it back, to make you think, are we really an empire? Is that what's happened here as the United States? The father or grandfather of Republican government? Have we become an empire? Well, I respectfully submit, this is a strong indication we have become one. We don't actually put our official stamp of rulership on other countries, but effectively we are over there acting like an empire. It's troublesome. Quick note from my One Thing file. Check out the Joe Posnanski interview on Econ Talk on December 23rd, 2019. It's all about Harry Houdini. It's interesting. He points out that Harry Houdini wasn't the greatest magician, probably wasn't even the greatest escape artist, although he was pretty freaking good at being an escape artist. But he was perhaps the greatest self-promoter. And Posnanski points out that other magicians hated him. Not all of the magicians, but many other magicians just hated him. And still do to this day when they read about his biography, they just hate Houdini. One of them said, "We don't hate Houdini because he won. We hate him because he wasn't happy until everyone else lost." Now, in his defense, however, he did have a large number of redeeming characteristics. I don't want this lightning segment to leave you the impression that the guy was just a complete SOB. He wasn't. He had a lot of good characteristics as well. Although, I guess honesty wasn't one of them. He wrote an autobiography, and I guess the first paragraph said he was born in Appleton, Wisconsin. Which is just a flat-out lie. He was born in Eastern Europe. It's kind of funny. I'm really getting into Thomas Hoover's The Zen Experience, the history of Zen. Really, really enjoying it. The guy does a nice job. And I'm learning all sorts of new stuff, too. Every page tells me something else I hadn't really thought of or didn't know. In his discussion about Taoism, he talks about the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove. That's the name of this small group of men. They're part of a larger movement known as the School of Pure Conversation. So anyway, these 7 sages, they took pleasure in the finer things of life, like food and drink. But above all, they disdained, quote, the world of getting and spending, unquote. quote, they rejected fame, ambition, and worldly station, unquote. So here you have guys, they like getting together, they wore fine clothes, they drank fine wine, they had fine food, they had nice things, but they disdained the world of getting and spending. I feel like I could probably do a whole segment on them, but I can keep it to a lightning segment, primarily because other than the couple pages about them in Thomas Hoover's book, I don't know anything about them. But if I knew more, I think it's safe bet that I'd conclude that their disposition is a highly Christian one. The Christian disposition views creation as a great good to be enjoyed because it's created by a good God. But the Christian keeps the self in check, does not want to get and spend and grab things for its flesh, St. Paul and the flesh. A Christian knows that if you let the self run like that, if you let it out, it will rape the goodness of God's creation. So you have to keep the self in check. It's just detachment. And we've discussed many times, detachment's the virtue that lets someone properly enjoy created things, like wine, but not becoming too attached to them. And that's what this whole discussion of the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove just kind of screamed to me. It's like, these are like pre-Christians. And then again, I guess the 7 sages could go too far. One of them, I guess, habitually received guests while completely naked. You come to the door and this sage is standing there buck naked. Come on in. And he had a rationale for it, but I read it like 3 times. I really couldn't even get it straight in my mind exactly what his rationale was. Something about, I view my whole house as my clothes, and therefore by walking in my house, you're walking into my trousers, therefore I'm not wearing trousers. Something like that. I really couldn't even understand what his rationale was. But suffice to say, even someone with the apparent good taste and spiritual sense, like one of the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove, can go wrong if not guided by a proper metaphysic. Another interesting thing about the 7 sages, I guess they would talk and talk and talk. That's what they did. Fine food, fine wine, fine conversation. And they would have conversation, they would talk until they reached the unnameable, and then they'd stop talking. And at that point, they silently understood each other with smiles. That's like the end of the evening. They reached the unnameable. Yeah, in the antidote, you do have Jacques Derrida. You could say the 7 sages pre-sage deconstruction. And as I'll be flushed down this podcast in the future, this type of awareness of limitation language pops up repeatedly from ancient times to modern times, medieval times, in the East, in the West, in the Middle East. It's been a recurring theme constantly. The Jacques Derrida, the deconstructionists, are merely the most recent manifestation of it. Hey, quick plug for a Catholic organization. Go to CatholicPrayerCards.org. They have great prayer cards. I realize prayer cards might seem a little outdated in the world of the internet and the iPhone. But, there's something about holding something tangible like a card or a book in your hands. It's different than holding your iPhone. It also doesn't get the old people in the church mad at you for looking at your phone. Who refuse to believe that you can actually have prayer cards on your phone. So you get these Catholic prayer cards. They're nifty. They're just like regular business-sized cards. They're 25 cents each, and they're beautiful. And the back side of the cards have great quotes from various saints. Okay, that's gonna be a wrap. Hey, it's 2020. New things are afoot with the Weekly Demon. You'll notice if you go to the website a greatly expanded show notes page. So every episode is going to have a lot of show notes. It almost reads like a transcript of the show, but it's not. It's basically a summary of the show, although an expanded summary. The Twitter feed's also active, so go follow that. It's greatly appreciated. And the Weekly Demon Facebook page is semi-active. As always, thanks for listening.